It is great to be here. We are live in, where's this? Ottawa in Canada, my home and native land. True patriot love in all thy, oh, you can't say the next word, can you? It's like, anyway, it's about a few years ago, they had a poll and it demonstrated, they found that 87% of Americans knew the first line of the Star-Spangled Banner, but only something like 63% of Canadians knew the first line of O Canada, which is odd because the first line of O Canada is O Canada. And even weirder, it's the only two words in the song that haven't been changed as well. It's a strange thing. It's if you go, I saw outside just here, they've got like a gender-neutral bathroom at the Shaw Centre, and that's apparently where the new lyrics of O Canada were written. They're actually, they've got a Canadian heritage plaque in the first stall in there. It's very moving. We are live here at the Manning Centre Conference, where we are in, I think we're about a third of the way through the Canadian Conservative Party leadership campaign. And we were going to have guests, and I would talk to the Canadian leadership candidates. And then I discovered there are, in fact, a zillion of them. And since I've been in Ottawa, I haven't met anyone who isn't a Canadian Conservative Party leadership candidate. And in fact, if we can get the cameras on, they've had so many that they can't have a debate. Because even if they did it like in Hollywood Squares format, where they stacked them all up on top of each other, they couldn't get them on the stage. So they had, as you know, yesterday, they had to break them out into small groups of leadership candidates, just having these small little meetings, and that's still going on. And these people, by the way, if you're wondering who all these people are. That's the panel on tax policy that's going to begin immediately after the show from the leadership candidates. It's a very painstakingly negotiated format. Every one of these leadership candidates gets a 45-second opening statement, and then they're going to have the world's longest bathroom break. So it's a terrific thing to see all these leadership candidates here. And of course, it's great to be back in my home and native land in this 150th anniversary year. Yeah. It's 150 years since the Conservative Party leadership campaign got started. And a lot of people, Sir John A. Macdonald was doing well in the early part of it, and then he fumbled his answer to Brad Trost and Kevin O'Leary about transgendered bathrooms on the Canadian Pacific Railroad, and no one's heard a word from him since. But it's great to be here. I would love to run. If there is anyone in the room who isn't a leadership candidate, I would actually love to meet him. My son is somewhere around here. Oh, there he is, yeah. And I love all the networking at these kinds of conferences. We were at this swank reception the first night here, and I was talking to Jason Kenney. Jason was here earlier, and he told me that his plan is after 5 years he's going to come back and become Prime Minister in Ottawa, and then he's going to make me Governor General. Oh, wait, Jason told me not to mention that. Sorry about that. But so anyway, I was talking to Jason, and just out of earshot, I could hear this guy networking and engaging my son in conversation. I just like can catch my son all of a sudden talking about tax policy. And this guy has assumed that he is like a big-time young staffer for Jason Kenney or Maxime Bernier or whoever. And after about 20 minutes, this guy networking, he says, "Oh, what do you do?" And my son says, "Oh, I'm in 11th grade." And the guy realizes he just wasted 20. But anyway, my son's now running for the leadership campaign. he was like very impressive on the Canada-European Union Trade Pact. It was incredibly impressive. Anyway, it was terrific with the leadership campaign yesterday. And you were probably listening to the band as I came out. And you thought, wow, this is actually the next stage of the leadership campaign. You probably listened to the band and you're thinking, wow, they're really pretty bad, aren't they? That's because after the policy discussion, we then go through to, it's like Miss America, it's the talent round. And they just passed out 5 musical instruments at random and said, give it your best shot. And so let's have a big hand for them. They're the house band, Kevin O'Leary and the Loyal Opposition. And that's Kevin O'Leary on piano. That's Andrew Shear on bass. That is Michael Chong on guitar. Deepak O'Brien on drums, and it's Lisa Raitt on saxophone. So, and the winner goes through to face Maxime Bernier in the interpretative dance round of renegotiating NAFTA with Donald Trump. So you won't want to miss that. It's great stuff. Great to be with you. We have Tal Bachman, the great Tal Bachman, who is on the show today, and he is going to. And as I said, we've got a room full of Canadian leadership candidates here. And every single person in this room is a former cabinet minister, because you've got to have credentials to run for the Canadian Conservative Party leadership. And I think it's like Stephen Harper's trade minister down there. And way at the back, that little fella, don't stand up there. He was Sir Mackenzie Bowell's fisheries minister in 1895, and he's been in the private sector for a century and a quarter, but he's tanned, rested, and ready to come back and compete for the Canadian Conservative Party leadership. Anybody know what Sir Mackenzie Bowell is distinguished? This is prime ministerial trivia. Preston Manning has a fully loaded Prius, if you get the question right. So, anybody know Sir Mackenzie? What? Shortest serving prime minister. No, he's got it all over Kim Campbell on that one. I think it's he was the last Canadian prime minister with a beard. Maybe time for another, I think. Do you know, when I came here yesterday, we did a little sound check, and they moved some of the furniture. They'd had some of the leadership debates, and or so-called, and they had the guys' notes. I might pass these out and auction them on eBay. But they had, along with Kevin O'Leary's security pass, because he came off at the end of it and just like hurled his security pass aside, and somebody snaffled it up. So if you're at any of the closing receptions and you see some smelly social justice hippie type wandering around with Kevin O'Leary's security pass, you call security, because he shouldn't have it. But they had all these are actually the notes that these candidates, and if you're like public speaking like me, you always like to get tips from other people. And these are the actual notes that these guys had. And some of them had typed them out, and some of them had written them out with highlighter. And I like this guy who just got a Shaw Centre notepad, and he'd written on it 3 lines: foreign advocacy, delays, and benefits. Foreign advocacy, delays, benefits. And I didn't know whether that's like 3 separate policy positions of his, or whether it's like a haiku, or whether it's actually his campaign slogan, foreign advocacy, delays, benefits. It's actually true, if you think about it. John Kerry called for Bashar Assad to step down 5 years ago, and how's that working out? Foreign advocacy, delays, benefits. You know, it makes sense. This one says, I was the first I was the first one to say we should abolish SM. Who knows what SM is? What? No, sadomasochism. We need to clean up this filthy den of a town where cabinet ministers, we don't want any more ministers of the crown hanging upstairs down in bondage dungeons or lunchtime instead of dealing with the people's business. Supply masochism, sadomanagement. He's pledged to abolish it. This is the one I like. He's got wife, 3 kids written down. Now, my memory is going. You know, but I think if you have to, I know how many kids I've got. I can't remember their names or ages, but I know the number. What is it? Is it 3? 5. Okay, I was in the ballpark. It's and then he's written "Je parle français." So that's either Maxime Bernier or Stephen Blaney, because no other candidate has that much French. It's great. That's great. Je parle français. Wife, 3 kids. I forgive him. It's like ma femme et mes 3 enfants. He had to learn the phrase in English. It's great. It's great stuff. They are all good people. You know, I'm not one of these people who's a purist about these things. I'm a believer in a big tent. And I don't make the mistake of thinking that, you know, my 60% ally is my 40% enemy. And I'm quite happy with people who have different policy positions and who have no problem defending their corner, arguing their corner. What I want to talk about today is I have had enough, though, of people who go along with what I think is the most malign trend in our politics today, and which Andrew Lawton touched on earlier, and that is the attempt to shrivel the bounds of discussion, and the attempt to label people who disagree with you if you happen to have a policy dispute. If you happen to disagree on public policy, you must be a racist, you must be a homophobe, you must be an Islamophobe. There'll be a new phobe along any minute. It's like the number 23 bus. There'll be a new phobe along. And so I wanted to talk about that today. Some of you may have heard Jordan Peterson earlier. And Jordan Peterson did not seek that fight. Some of us do see. My friend Ezra Levant seeks fights with anyone. He doesn't really care if you haven't got a difference of opinion with him, he'll supply one. He's got them piled up in the trunk of his car, and he's looking to. But most people who find themselves in the crosshairs on these kinds of issues did not seek the fight, and Jordan Peterson didn't, and he is in the fight of his life. And some of you know what it's about, because he's been told that he has to use the pronouns of choice that people have. Not everybody wants to be he or she, and some people want to be Z. And then there's some other ones. Again, there's just whatever it is now, 23 pronouns, but there'll be another 37 that they add to the list a little way down the line. There will never be enough. And the most interesting thing, I'm not going to endorse a candidate or anything here today, because I don't want to ruin their chances, like I just did when I said that Jason Kenney had offered to make me Governor General, and I don't want to do that to anybody else. And but I do think this. The most interesting thing I heard today was I talked with a lot of the candidates, and Maxime Bernier was explaining to me why he had changed his mind on the transgender rights bill after talking to Professor Peterson. He had come to understand that these, and he's a big-time libertarian. He's all into individual liberty. He's all into economic liberty. He's all into small government. And a lot of people feel that it's easy to kind of concede on these peripheral matters like non-gender specific bathrooms or whatever. It's not really important. So he signed on to the transgender rights bill, and he has now revised his position on that after talking with Professor Peterson, because he understands that there is something Orwellian going on. It's about trying to, it's not about a diversity of opinion. It's not about celebrating diversity. It's actually a means of thought control, totalitarian. And changing language actually is an Orwellian act. To say that there is no longer just he and she, but that there is Z and these other pronouns is an Orwellian act, a totalitarian act. Now, I was heartened to listen to Monsieur Bernier explain with great modesty, actually, how he had come to see the error of his ways on that thing. And at the end of it, by the way, I asked him what I know that he is il and she is elle, and I asked him what Z was in French. And he said there actually is, French has no word for Z and these new pronouns for the people living in a non-binary gender. And that's amazing to me, because the French language has genders for everything. As you know, it has genders for tables and chairs and light fixtures and drum kits. And the only thing apparently it has no gender for is University of Toronto students. So I'm in favor of Canada just being unilingual French, if that's what it takes to keep us in sanity. Bill M103, again, it sounds nice and innocuous. You know, we're all opposed to hatred. We're all opposed to hatred. What it will do is incentivize a bureaucracy to further shrivel the bounds of acceptable public discourse. And I do not want us to be going down that road. What's interesting to me is that if you go to a university campus, fewer and fewer people now think it natural that there should be diversity of opinion. They think there's a correct opinion on same-sex marriage, there's a correct opinion on Islam, there's a correct opinion on transgendered bathrooms, and the list gets longer and longer. David Suzuki thinks that people who disagree with him on climate change should be thrown in prison. And that's no obstacle to him becoming one of the most beloved Canadians. The fact that he regularly calls for people who disagree with him to be, well, he's not even clear on the criminal prosecution. He basically just says they should be thrown in prison. Only very weak ideas need protection from criticism. And you may recall, and by the way, that is a weak idea. There are all kinds of unknowns on the climate issue. And that actually would benefit from the widest possible range of discussion, instead of this cartoon climatology that we have now when it comes to the environment. You may recall that the Prince of Wales, the next King of Canada, actually won't be the next King of Canada. I'll tell you why in a minute. The Prince of Wales said in July 2009 that we only had 96 months to save the planet. Not 95 months, not 97 months, 96 months, which if you work it out is July 2017, which is why we're not going to have King Charles III sitting on the throne. So he said we only had 96 months to save the planet, and he then got into his limo and was driven to his other palace to give another speech about how you should lower your carbon footprint. That's July 2017. So if you think about it, I believe the Tory leadership race is supposed to wrap up in May. So that will mean the new Tory leader will be in office for 2 months, and then kaboom, it's the apocalypse. the world will end in July 2017, according to His Royal Highness. A couple of months before that, he announced that the jig would, while he was saying the jig would be up for us in 96 months, that the red squirrel would be extinct within 10 years. So that's April 2019. So if you've got your planner here, global civilization will collapse in July 2017, and then the red squirrel will get to gamble and frolic in the ruins and rubble for 2 years before he's kaput. So it's like Planet of the Squirrels at the Manning Conference, because we'll be gone in July. You know, he wouldn't say it if it wasn't true, you know. We'll be gone in July. Next year at the Manning Conference, there'll be Maxime the Squirrel, and Kevin the Squirrel, and Deepak the Squirrel, and Kelly the Squirrel, holding vicious, bushy-tailed breakout panels for each other's nuts in the ruins of Ottawa. And David Suzuki says that if you're one of these people who goes, well, I don't know about that, that you should be thrown in the slammer. You should be thrown in jail. Our politicians should be thrown in the slammer for willful blindness, unquote. This urge, not to discuss or to debate, but just to punish people for disagreeing, is now rampant. On all kinds of issues. At the University of Toronto, where Jordan Peterson works, they think you should have your career destroyed for disagreeing with them. David Suzuki thinks you should be jailed for disagreeing with him. And as we know from Charlie Hebdo and similar incidents, there are men, mostly men, not all men, and women on the other side of the ocean and on this continent who think you should be killed for disagreeing with them, who think that the answer to a cartoon you don't like, which is an expression of opinion, is to kill the cartoonist. And it's personal to me. I spoke at the 5th anniversary of the Danish Mohammed cartoons in Copenhagen. And I shared the stage with 5 other people. There were 6 of us on stage that day. What has happened since then is that Lars Hedegaard, our host, one of the 6, he was shot at point-blank range by a guy who has since fled to Turkey, and Turkey's refusing to extradite him to Denmark. Lars Vilks, the Swedish artist, he had his event shot up 2 years ago. And 2 people died at a free speech event in Copenhagen. So Lars Vilks is out of it now. He's had to go into hiding. The Dutch cartoonist Neckshot, who could only appear in a burqa lest anybody saw his face and saw his real identity, he's been forced into hiding out of public life. Shabana Rehman, a Norwegian comedienne, had her family's restaurant firebombed. As I said, there were 6 of us on stage that day, and that's 4 of them. That's a 67% strike rate, which is pretty impressive. And when I went back for the 10th anniversary of those Mohammed cartoons, the people I was on stage with on that 5th anniversary could no longer be on stage with me. So this M103, it's not benign and harmless. It actually will lead to more violence, because it actually says this subject is beyond discussion. This idea cannot be subjected to the vigorous back and forth of real public debate. And every time you attempt to do that, you are creating a world not only in which people have to walk on eggshells and will still be destroyed, as people like Jordan Peterson, they're trying to be destroyed, but you will also lead to more acts of violence. because in countries where there is no free speech, then shooting and bombing and killing is the only way you can have a difference of opinion. I am in favor of the most vigorous, unbounded level of discussion on Islam, on climate change, on transgendered bathrooms, and whatever 10 other subjects are ruled out of bounds. And I do not begrudge somebody having a difference on tax policy. I don't begrudge someone having a difference on immigration, on the EU Trade Pact, or a zillion other issues. But when your position on free speech is that you can't say that, then you are not actually having a debate or a discussion. You are trying to shut down and short-circuit the discussion. I am tired of that. I fought a long campaign to get Section 13, which should never have been on the books, and again was another supposedly benign law, Section 13 repealed, and I do not want that sneaking back in through the back door with appalling resolutions like this M103 or its equivalent in Ontario, which passed unanimously, and I heard some great sophisticate explain that, well, they're trying to get to the stage now where they pass a unanimous Islamophobia motion, and then they're going to pass a unanimous Judeophobia motion, and then they're going to pass a unanimous Mennonitophobia motion, because Mennonitophobia is rampaging out of control. If you go north of Toronto, you'll know it's just crazy out there. This stuff, it is. Have you been to Brampton lately? It's, I'm a phobia phobe, and I am sick of the medicalization of differences of opinion. With that, we will turn to the first of our musical performances. I love the music at the Manning Conference. You probably think, what music at the Manning Conference? When I was here 3 years ago, I was in an elevator rather late at night with Chuck Strahl and Monty Solberg, two doughty former ministers of the Crown. And it was one of those, it was a long elevator ride. I don't know, it was 17 floors or something. And I was in the middle, and the two of them began singing Sometimes When We Touch to each other. Sometimes when we touch, the honesty's too much. And that was actually way too much honesty for me. But that's what I love about the Manning Conference. You know, I've never been in any CPAC that they have in Washington, D.C. I've never seen Ted Cruz and Rand Paul singing Sometimes When We Touch to each other. So but I thought, you know, it's hard to follow Chuck Strahl and Monty Solberg singing Sometimes When We Touch, the honesty's too much. But we do have a great musical performer for you here today. Tal Bachman, singer, songwriter, scion. He's the son of Randy Bachman, who many of you will know from Bachman-Turner Overdrive that he fought. Randy Bachman, Garth Turner, and I think it was Kevin Overdrive. I forget who the third one was. Anyway, Bachman-Turner Overdrive, and Tal, come on out, Tal. Singer, songwriter, Tal Bachman. Hey, great to see you, Tal. Tal actually opened for me at an event at Conrad Black's house, and it didn't work out too well for Conrad, as you may have heard some years ago. But normally I get someone who kind of like Andrew. No disrespect to Andrew Lawton, who comes and does the opening act. But Tal opened for me at Conrad's pad, and he sang a couple of great songs, and one of them, which really touched me, because you picked out a Kink song that you thought that I'd like. Yeah.
Did you know that one before?
Yeah, I hadn't heard it in since I was 14 or something. So it was
maybe
great.
It was better than when I did it.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. And I liked the way he did it, which is why I asked him to come on. Because as I said, it's Canada's 150th birthday. And and on our show, we're featuring a lot of great Canadian songs. And this is one of my favorite Canadian songs. Not a lot of people know that it's Canadian. Most people will know the Billboard Top 40 and Casey Kasem Counting It Down. And the Billboard Hot 100 is the gold standard of what all the hit songs are. And it started in 1940. And the very first hit record, the very first American #1 record in 1940 was the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra with the Pied Pipers and a young boy vocalist called Frank Sinatra. But it was a Canadian song. And so the very first American #1 was actually a Canadian song by my fellow Torontonian, Ruth Lowe. And Ruth married a music publicist in Chicago in 1938, and they were very happy for a year, and then he had a routine operation and he died. And she was devastated. And she went back to Toronto and she was living in her parents' apartment, and her life was ruined, and she used to look out the window at the park across the street and she'd see all these couples walking by. And she said to her sister, I look at those couples and I know I'll never smile again. And somewhere in the midst of her grief, the old songwriter's light bulb went off, and she thought that was a good song title, and she wrote it up. That was 1939. 3 months later, Canada was at war, and with all those great war ballads for all those parted lovers, I'll Be Seeing You and We'll Meet Again. This is Canada's contribution, sung by Tal Bachman.
I'll see if I can do it justice. I'll never smile again until I smile at you. I'll never laugh again. What good would it do? For tears would fill my eyes. My heart would realize that our romance is true. I'll never love again. I'm so in love with you. I'll never thrill again to somebody new. Within my heart, I know I will never start to smile again until I smile at you. Smile at you. I'll never smile again till I smile at you. Thank you, Tal. That is, he made me very happy. That is one of my favorite songs. Yeah.
And a great
I wish
song.
I'd written that one.
You do?
Oh,
That's
yeah,
good.
of course.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's a lady,
Ruth Lowe, she was a big star, and they wanted to make a movie about her with Judy Garland playing her. When they inducted her into the Grammy Hall of Fame, Frank Sinatra actually did the introduction. But she chose to turn her back on all that and came back to raise a family in Toronto in her home. And it's a great song, Tal. And Tal, we asked Tal to do kind of one for me and one for him. So he's going to come back and close us out with a great song that Tal is going to do for us in just a bit. Thanks, thanks, Tal. That's great. Thank you. And as Tal and I were talking about, because this identity politics even infects songs now. There's a high school in St. Paul, Minnesota that has just announced that it's not going to let its children study any, it's banned by any music from white composers. It's just going to buy music from composers of color, as they put it, which is a phrase. So this high school band won't be playing anything by Beethoven or Brahms or Mozart or whoever, because these are all white composers and a band. And that's actually a form of child abuse to talk about identity politics like that. That's a great song, not because she's a woman or she's a Canadian, or she's a composer of color or non-color, or a composer of Canadianness. It's a great song on its own terms, and we should get back to looking at things from that basic sense, without all this identity politics nonsense. We're going to take some questions. Anything that is on your mind, I'm happy to answer your questions, and I think Alyssa and Anna have got the microphone, so just, if you've got a question, just wait and Anna will get to you.
Hi. Hello?
Hi.
I'm Nancy. One of the primary groups lobbying for a new thing called sanctuary cities in Canada is a group called No One Is Illegal. If you go to their site, they promote overthrowing the government, and they're clearly anarchists.
Right.
What do you say to that and the multiple social justice groups, they call themselves social justice groups, that are causing all of the chaos in Canada right now?
Well, I think they're actually upfront about it if they're anarchists and they want to overthrow the government. Because they're actually telling you what they intend to happen, which is that advanced, developed societies should actually collapse. Immigration is the prerogative of sovereign states. If like a lot of people, I mentioned Ezra Levant, my friend Ezra Levant a few minutes ago. A lot of people don't like Ezra. And I've seen tweets that say, I'm just so ashamed that you're Canadian. Well, suck it up, loser, because if you're born here, you're Canadian, and you got to take it, you know? But you don't, if you're not Canadian, you get to choose between who it's your choice as to who crosses your borders. And it would be nice if everyone could move to Canada. There are about 1 billion people in the developed world and about 6 billion people in the rest of the world. So only about 1 billion people, about 1/6 of the rest of the planet, has to decide it wants to move to Europe and North America, and that's it for Europe and North America. That's what they've seen in I spent much of last year in Europe, because I took part in the Monk debate with Nigel Farage. We were competing against Louise Arbour, former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, and Simon Sharma, a big-time BBC telly historian. And we kicked their butts. And what was interesting, I thought, was that that impeccably progressive liberal men like Doug Saunders of the Globe and Mail actually denied anything was going on. And so I thought, well, maybe I am actually going bonkers. Maybe I'm going nuts. So I not long after that, I hopped on a plane. I spent most of the next few months in Europe, from way up in Finland, in Kemi, which is kind of the lower part of Lapland. There's kind of nothing between there and Santa's Grotto, all the way down to the Mediterranean. And I spoke to dozens and dozens of women in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Italy, who had been sexually assaulted. And I also spoke, to come back to the point you raised, I also spoke to a very nice Norwegian lady who was teaching classes to these men who come from Afghanistan or a culture where women are chattel and properties. You come from Afghanistan where by law a woman could not feel sunlight on her face. By law. Now I know not feeling sunlight on your face is like living in Ottawa 10 months of the year, but in Afghanistan that's kind of a big deal. And then to come to a culture where women there's mixed bathing and she's actually trying, and they're nice, well-meaning people, and they've developed all these pictograms in Germany that they hand out now, where there's you'll see a lady in a bathing suit, and then a hand on her bottom, and there's a big X. Which is meant to tell the recent immigrant that you're not meant to put the hand on the bottom. And then they found out actually that some of these immigrants don't even know that the big X means you can't do it. They thought it was just like a handy highlighter in case you're not sure where the bottom is. So, you know, I think it's useful with some people, but even that presupposes a kind of certain amount of development and sophistication. You may recall that Paul Keating, the former Australian Prime Minister, got into trouble because he once put his hand on the Queen's bottom. And if they had, before he went to greet her, a picture of the Queen with a big hand on her bottom and an X through it, Paul Keating would have known that it means you can't put your hand on the Queen's bottom, because Paul Keating is a relatively sophisticated person in that respect. And the problem here is that we think assimilation occurs automatically. It doesn't. It's hard, and it can't be done beyond a certain level. And it can't be done in a culture where the Prime Minister of Canada tells the New York Times that there is no mainstream in Canada, there is no core identity in Canada. And so I will take my chances with anarchist groups who just want to smash everything up. But I feel what is kind of suppler and more disturbing is when Justin Trudeau, who knows better, says that. Because Louise Arbour, who did terrific work on prosecuting rape as a war crime in Sudan and Bosnia, and yet does not take it seriously when instead of happening in some dusty village in Sudan, it's happening on the streets of German cities or of Swedish cities. So actually, I think it's the delusions of Monsieur Trudeau and Madame Arbour that are actually far more dangerous and harder to resist. And this idea that no one is illegal, by the way, I have spent 2 weeks watching these photographs of Somalis fleeing across the border from the Trump terror into the welcoming arms of Canadians. They're swarming across the 49th parallel to be embraced by Canadians. And it's incredibly flattering to be told that that's who you are, that you're the good people, you're the kind people, and no one is illegal. I'll tell you who's illegal. My makeup artist, who was held for 2 hours at the Highgate Springs, Vermont, Phillipsburg, Quebec,
border crossing, and they did, there she is. Look, doesn't she look suspicious? That's Heather. They did a background check on her, and they found out she'd been doing my makeup for 9 years, so they detained her for 2 hours. I didn't even know Canada did. If you walk around the streets of any Canadian city, it's obvious they do background checks on nobody. There's Jason Kenney. You can ask him about how many background checks Canada. There's Heather, they did a background check on, and they found out she did my makeup and she'd done Justin Bieber's makeup. So Canada's 2 teen heartthrobs. In the end, it isn't really funny, because in the end, if countries just dissolve their borders, as Germany and Sweden have, they have something in China called the one-child policy. And it's basically the fact that they have the worst gender imbalance, worst sex imbalance of any population cohort in history, because they had a one-child policy, so everyone aborted the girls or killed them in the first hours of life. So they got all these boys for which there are no chicks. And that's generally not a recipe for social stability unless you're planning on becoming the first gay superpower since Sparta. So what's fascinating to me is Sweden. That's, I think it's one, they took 20 years to reach a sex imbalance that distorted. Sweden's done that in just a year and a half, simply by opening its doors to fit young Muslim men who all claim to be 16 or 17, because you don't have to go through refugee process, then you're automatically a child and you have the same rights as a Swedish child. So if you go anywhere in Europe, it's now like the Sound of Music all year round. Everyone is 16 going on 37. I met these 32-year-old Gambians in a refugee house in Reutlingen, all pretending to be 17-year-old Syrians. And nobody checks. You know what a Gambian looks like, and you know what a Syrian looks like. You know what a 35-year-old guy looks like, and you know what a 16-year-old looks like. Nobody checks. And in the end, Sweden has wound up now with its teenagers with a worse sex imbalance between boys and girls than China has after 30 years of the one-child policy. Basically, Sweden caught up and passed them in a year and a half. In the end, when they say no one is illegal, they're basically saying also no one is legal. Because if everybody is just a Canadian citizen in waiting, then no one is a Canadian citizen. And they are dissolving your country. Yep.
Hi there, Mitch Wolf. Assume you're an advisor to our Prime Minister, Joe Trudeau. Okay. We learned yesterday by Tom Quiggin, who's a security expert,
Right.
that the terrorist Muslim Brotherhood has infiltrated many mosques in Montreal, Toronto, Mississauga, Calgary, in which many of the imams on a daily basis are leading prayers to Allah, basically to kill all infidels.
Right.
So what would you do?
Well, I would. This isn't a new story, by the way. You all remember that after 9/11, every Western leader was doing this whole, get me to the mosque on time routine, and he was just taking off for the mosque and being photographed with whatever big shot imam he could find. In the days that followed, in the years that followed, it emerged that almost all those imams were problematic. There were only a couple of degrees of separation from them and some very shifty characters. In the case of Anwar al-Awlaki at the whatever it is, the King Fahd Mosque in Virginia, who got big-time invitations to the White House and Congress,
The US wound up having to take him out by drone strike when he went back to Yemen. He became basically the #1 recruiter for Al-Qaeda, and yet he was photographed with every single big shot. It happened to Bush, happened to Tony Blair. The only guy it didn't happen to was Mike Harris, who was Premier of Ontario, and after 9/11, he didn't go to the mosque himself, and he sent, the Deputy Junior Assistant Minister of Motor Vehicles to go to the mosque, and everyone slammed him and said how disgraceful that he's not showing support by going to the mosque. This is not uncommon. Nobody. It's not unusual, and I think one of the things that Western nations have the right to do is end foreign funding of mosques. Canada has no problem ending foreign ownership of all kinds of other stuff. If you're like a nice shishi little gay couple who have a bookstore in San Francisco and you're fleeing the Trump terror and you want to and you go to Vancouver and you want to open your nice little shishi gay bookstore in Vancouver, the Canadian state says, no, you nice little shishi gay couple, you can't run a gay bookstore in Vancouver because you're not Canadian. So we talked about, we just heard I'll Never Smile Again. As Tal can tell you, Canadian radio stations are told they have to play a certain amount of Canadian content so that they measure it up. Have you got a Canadian producer, a Canadian songwriter, a Canadian arranger? And if you don't get enough points, your records get less airplay than Dan Hill Sometimes When We Touch. That's the only reason Monty Solberg and Chuck Stroll know every single word of the lyric, because it's been in high rotation for 40 years. So the Canadian state has no problem saying, dictating what records can be played on the radio and who can own a gay bookstore in Vancouver, and it surely, therefore, and likewise, you cannot be a big-time doctor in Switzerland. They've got the euthanasia clinics, and you can't become, and they're coining it, those euthanasia guys. It's booming. It's like the Alberta oil sands, the death business in Switzerland. And if you're a Swiss guy, you cannot come to Canada and say, I'm opening up I'm going to open a Sarnia branch of my death clinic because it's booming in Switzerland. I'm going to open one. The Canadian state says foreigners can't do this, foreigners can't do that, but foreigners can invest and fund illiterate imams to preach hatred day in, day out at mosques across the Western world. And ending foreign Saudi funding of mosques, Iranian funding of mosques, would be the swiftest and easiest way of cleaning up some of the problem here. And we're going to close things out with one more great song. Will you please welcome back Tal Bachman, and we will have a great. Now we've been talking about all this identity politics, Tal. You told me that it's now actually. You're getting some of this stuff down the musical end of things, aren't you?
Well, everyone's very sensitive, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're on eggshells. Yeah, you want me to tell that?
Yeah, go on, tell it, because I'm astonished by this.
Well, I had a great experience one night a couple of years ago with my Japanese girlfriend where we found ourselves in a small town in remote Japan. Nobody spoke English, and we found ourselves in a little bar, and the bar had a karaoke machine. So I was there, and we're kind of scrolling through. There's all kinds of Japanese artists and stuff. I don't know anything about them. All of a sudden comes up Paul McCartney, My Love. And I had sort of sworn a vow to myself that I would never actually sing a karaoke or anything. But prior to that, it was the situation. And so we put it on, and it turned out to be this wonderful kind of moving, connective experience, because all of these elderly gentlemen in the bar, Japanese guys who didn't speak a word of English, all knew the song phonetically.
Right.
And so we finished the song, and everybody was clapping. Guys were shaking hands, and I said, well, let's sing it again. And so we sang it, 10 times or something, right? And each time we sang it, and the drinks were flowing, and let's do it one more time. And So I shared that story one night when I was playing at a pub. It seemed to go over really well because the whole message was, music can bring people together, right? And it kind of transcends time and all those sorts of things. And maybe I should tell the end of the story when I'm done this song.
Yeah, maybe you. No, I tell you what. Let's tell it now because I want us to hear the music unsullied by the politics. As it were.
Okay. To my utter shock, the morning after I played this little show back in Victoria and I had shared this story, I got a phone call from the owner of the venue, screaming, shouting at me, tearing a strip off of me because I had promoted racism at his venue the night before. And he had gotten this email from the floor manager of this pub saying that I had gone on stage, I had, talked about Japanese people not being able to speak English, and it had turned into this bizarre, convoluted, trigger. Right. I had triggered the floor manager with this, what I thought was a heartwarming story, and it had somehow metastasized in her imagination, and I don't know how it happened to an anti-Japanese screed, and I had the venue owner on the phone yelling at me, saying your hatred of Japanese people is not welcome in my establishment.
Right.
And I'm like, I was so shocked. I'm like, oh, the story was about me and my Japanese girlfriend,
who's actually sitting in the front row here. The hate crime herself is sitting right there.
Right. So anyway. I just thought of that when I knew you were going to talk about free speech because it has sort of seeped into every corner of existence with everybody kind of on guard. And I think for the manager that night, it was a way to score big points with her new employer.
No, and it is all about walking on eggshells, and you can't, there is nowhere to hide. So that even the small pleasures of life, like a 3-minute song, in the end will be denied you because everybody will be too busy tiptoeing around to sing. And this is a great song by Paul McCartney. If you are from the Ottawa branch of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, do a little intro so they've got time to dash out to the phone and call the cops on you.
Yeah, if you're and if you're an elderly Japanese gentleman, you can sing along too. Hey, here he is. Let's see if I can do this one, Justin. And when I go away, I know my heart will stay with my love. It's understood. It's everywhere with my love. My love does it good. Whoa, 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 whoa. My love does it good. And when the cupboard's bare, I'll still find something there with my love. Oh, it's understood. It's in the hands of my love. My love does it good. Yo, whoa, 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 whoa. My love does it good. Whoa, my love. Oh, my love. Only my love holds the other key to me. Oh, my love. Oh, my love. Only my love does it good to me. Whoa, whoa, whoa. to get Chuck Stroll to sing that one next time.
No, that is way better than Chuck Stroll's version. That's Tal Bachman, the next leader of the Canadian Conservative Party. You heard it. You heard it here first. He knocked out Maxime Bernier. Maxime Bernier made the mistake of doing Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, and nobody wanted to know. So Tal Bachman is the new leader of the Canadian Conservative Party. That was a terrible story. I want you to remember that story. How weird it is now that people are listening to Tal talking about My Love, singing My Love, and they're thinking about what racial or other identity politics offense that could be given. It could have been worse. On the Isle of Wight a couple of years ago, it was Oldies Night, and a guy was singing Kung Fu Fighting. Mm-hmm. Which was a hit for a black guy from the British West Indies, arranged by an arranger from India. That's how white supremacist Kung Fu Fighting is. And a couple of people were passing the pub in the middle of his song, and they called the police and had him arrested because the line, "There were funky Chinamen from funky Chinatown," is now a hate crime. And these are not the things we thought we would have to defend Western civilization on. I did not think funky Chinamen from funky Chinatown would be the hill that Western civilization would die on. But the small hills, the small molehills add up. And that's why it is important to cling to the small pleasures in life, like hearing Tal perform a great song like that. Because if you don't defend every small provocation, one day they will be gone. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Tal Bachman. Great. Thank you. And now Monty Solberg is going to come out and do his medley from South Pacific for the next 40. No, I'm not. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That is it. It has been great being with you. And I hope, assuming that the Prince of Wales's apocalypse does not occur, and that next year it's just not wall-to-wall red squirrels sitting in the room, I hope to see you again next time. Please give a big hand to our house band as they play us out, Kevin O'Leary and the Loyal Opposition.